You might have noticed that today our theme is the river, or the river of life, because we're talking about life today. And I wanted to talk about that because we're here at this beautiful new place, and this beautiful new place, you had to cross the river, most of you anyway. If you came from the other side, you had to cross the creek, or creek, depending on how you say it, to get here. And so I wanted to talk about what that means, because in many ways, I like to say that we're all recovering Christians. We think we know what something means, and so for most of us, because we come from a history of the last 100 years of what I think of as the American Reformation, we think we know what some of these old songs mean. And so I wanted to frame that in terms of being in a new place and having a new outlook, but also having new meanings. So if you notice, we started out with a meditation today, and I want you to think about this not as a sermon or as a history or as a guy mansplaining up here for the next 20 or so minutes. I wanted you to think about how the things you believe to be true are not necessarily true. That's not a bad thing. It's just the best metaphor you had to get you where you needed to be. And so to most people, we hear songs about the river, and what do we think about? We think about, I'm crossing the River Jordan. I'm going home. To the Jewish people who wandered the desert for 40 years, and who none of them, not a single person who escaped from Israel, crossed the river to Jordan. Where did they go? Well, they all died. And nobody was allowed to go to the other side, to Canaan, to the promised land, until everybody who left who left Egypt, died. So the literal translation of the River Jordan and the meaning in Judaism is that the Jordan is the river of death. And Ray just played a song, and in the song, he was asking a question. And the person who wrote the song was asking a question. But if you listen carefully, he is referencing two rivers. One that we cross, that is the river of death. And one that flows from the throne of God to us, the river of life. This is the Thornapple River here. I'm pointing the right way, I hope. And the Thornapple is a river that the natives who were here first, literally where we are, was both an Odawa and a Potawatomi settlement. And when Rex Robinson, the first pioneer, and actually the first white guy to came here, there were thousands of natives living within a 50-mile radius. It's the Grand River Band. And to this day, they're not recognized as a band, even though there was a treaty that he negotiated with them here and in Grand Rapids, where they lived. And so they lived in Lowell, they lived here, they lived in that little cute town of Ada down there. And their name for the river I'm going to butcher this, it's Sangawaki, which means, if you look it up, if you Google this, it's going to tell you it means forked river. Like almost everything you Google, that's not right. It's two rivers. And this is the place where the rivers split. And so two rivers come together here. And we live in the fertile crescent, or the fertile area in the middle of all of that. And so I want to talk about the idea of two rivers, the river of life, the river of death, and also the idea that we can change our mind by listening to the words, by understanding the meaning, by knowing new things. And the more new things we know, the better metaphors that we have to live with. For instance, how many of you have noticed this beautiful chair here? Okay, and how many people know what this chair is? Okay, this is the chair that the founder, all right, 100 years ago, sat in this very chair. All right, so if most of you look at it, it's like beautiful, either bone work or ivory work, and beautiful wood, burl wood. But if you look closely, all of this is painted. All of this is painted. All of this is wood that has been carved and painted to look like bone. You can see it's on the end here. And if you're a paleontologist like I am, you'll notice that they really paid attention to the way that bone acts when you carve it. It's really an incredible, beautiful piece. As we call it, faux bois. That's French for fake wood. The thing is that it does not lessen the beauty of it to know that it's not real wood. Because the beauty of it is in the artistry. The beauty of it is not that it is expensive wood. It is that somebody took the time and the care to paint every single grain that's on this piece of wood. And if you turn it around and if you turn it underneath, even the parts that you will never see are beautifully hand-painted. All the songs that you heard today have other meanings. I come up here and I sing a song that some of you know as a gospel tune. It's a song that the slaves sang. They sang, "I went down in the river to pray." And if you listen to a lot of gospel music and a lot of slave songs, they'll say, "wade in the water." They don't talk about crossing Jordan and going home unless they're talking about dying, unless they're talking about the promised land, like heaven, the promised land. But when they're talking about wading in the water, they're talking about the power of the water itself. Now, this is a unity church, so when we talk about the power of water, a lot of people have different feelings about it, all right? So the beliefs of this particular church has changed in the last 100 years. And so if I were to ask any of you what your feelings are about it, you may have a whole bunch of different answers, and that's okay. Because the Fillmores themselves, does everybody here know who the Fillmores are? Okay, anybody not? Because I'd like to talk about it for just a second. Mildred and Charles Fillmore were the founders of the Unity movement. all right? They weren't necessarily a church at the beginning. They were part of a movement called the Congregational Movement. And the Congregational Movement came from, well, it started in Salem in 1692 here in the States because the Puritan church, which was a congregational church, killed 19 people as witches. And several more throughout the colonies before the colonies ever became the United States or the United Colonies even, 1692. And what happened was that the congregations invoked their power of sovereignty over the church, over the Puritan church, over the ministers that controlled the church, and they said, nevermore. And from that came all kinds of denominations, especially here in the States. So that by the time the 1800s roll around, you have the Christian Scientists, and you have the Scientists of Christ faith, you have the Church of Modern Thought, you have the Modernist Church, there's probably 100 denominations that all emanate from this one thing that happened. Why? Because the Fillmores loved three things. The first thing they loved is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Everybody know Ralph? All right. If you don't, you need to read Ralph. If you don't want to read all of Ralph, I want you to read a poem called The River. More than anything, it explains what unity, when it began, believed in. And it believed in three basic things: nature, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and from that, they began to write, and they began to preach, and they began to learn from different teachers all over the place. And so they put out a magazine called Modern Thought. But soon after they put that out, it became Modern Thought Christian Science. Now, a lot of people think that they were students of Mary Baker Eddy, the Christian Scientist founder. It turns out that they never were, but that a lot of movements and a lot of churches at the time were calling themselves Christian Scientists. So this is the mid-1800s now, all right? Those are the two things: nature, science, and a third thing is brought into it, is that a church that Charles Fillmore vehemently said, we are Christians that believe in science. He believed also, because Mildred did, in mysticism. So this church is rooted in three things that in the modern world are at odds with each other. And we're always trying to reconcile what it is we feel about things, what it is we believe about things. But I want to suggest to you that the river that runs to the throne of God also runs from the throne of God. And that, yes, we die, but also that the energies that relate to us are also about life. We are not the, as Emerson says, we do not have dominion over nature. We are puny pieces of clay that think we do. We're part of nature. And the idea of who we are as mystical people are because we are also a part of God. We're just the part of God that doesn't know it. We flow towards that knowledge. And that knowledge, that mysticism, that Vedanta flows towards us. Why do I use that word? All right, got to tell you another story. So, Millard and Charles decide in 1893 that they're going to go to Chicago. Why? Because the World Congress of Religions are going to meet. And sure enough, when they go there, they meet Mary Baker Eddy, and their teacher, Charlotte Hopkins, is there, and all of the giants of the Congregational movement, all the giants of the Presbytery movement, all the giants of pretty much every movement except Catholicism is there at the World Congress of Religions. And where is that? Well, it's in a park in Chicago, and at the same time, if you remember in 1893, we were, I'm going to get this word wrong. We're celebrating the quartercentenary of the Columbian Exposition, 400 years of Columbus being celebrated. Now, whatever you may think about that, and I have thoughts about that, it brought together all of the world's religions. But not only did it bring together all of the world's religions, it brought together all the things that we knew about nature. The largest botanical gardens ever assembled, and indoor gardens in order to bring the tropics here. The largest botanical garden ever assembled was brought here in a literal new Garden of Eden. Nature, mysticism. Oh, did I mention that Swami Vivekananda was here too? As was the giants of Buddhism and all of the world's religions. Not just, I belong to an ecumenical group, and I'm the only voodoo doctor in the whole group. Everybody else is ecumenical because they are of one of three Abrahamic faiths, all right? So I would like them to be ecumenical in the sense that all faiths are there and welcome. And in the last several years, there's even an atheist that belongs to that group. And we're getting better. We're growing. This is what was happening in 1893. So the third thing that you might want to know is that for the first time, Nikola Tesla is there. And Nikola Tesla electrifies the world literally by creating enough energy to light 250,000 light bulbs. Now think about being Mildred. Boy, I think about Millard Fillmore. We don't want to know about Mildred Fillmore. Mildred Fillmore and Charles Fillmore, imagine that they are at the epicenter of the world where Nikola Tesla is there, Swami Vivekananda is there, all the heroes of the Christian Science movement is there, not just Mary Baker Eddy, but all of them. Science, mysticism, and nature all in one place. If you can imagine how inspired they were, and they were inspired. Because of that, Charles began his talks and his, I forgot the word because nobody writes letters anymore, correspondence with Vivekananda. And he starts talking about two things. He starts talking about Vedanta and Brahman. So if Fred Stella were here, how many of you have heard Fred Stella, by the way? Okay, I am a huge Fred Stella fan. He would tell you who Brahman is and what Vedanta is and what the Veda is. Okay? The Veda is the river of life, and Brahman is the universe, is God, is everything. And so many of you might think that Hindus are polytheistic. They're not. They have one God. That God is Brahman, and Brahman is everything. And our knowledge, our goal, our Atman, our idea is to grow the Brahman inside of us, to evolve to the one that is outside of us, that is everything. That's one energy flow. And then, as we learn, it flows towards us and becomes ever more truthful. So that's Veda, the two rivers. What does that mean to us here, though? So, if any of you have been down, how many have you been down to the river to pray or play or whatever? There's a dam there. And that dam is a hydroelectric dam and has been here since the 1920s. Now, Charles Fillmore would tell you that in his church, Mildred would tell you that it was her church, that they don't baptize. He would say that water does not have any special power to cleanse your sins away. It does not have any sort of power to rebirth you. Now, Mildred would say that the poetry of it, that the metaphor of it was good enough. They agreed to disagree here. And as they moved forward, they realized that really they were saying the same thing. In every case we know of, when science and mysticism in nature meet, the more we understand about all three of them, the more we realize that they are never in conflict with each other. So nature and science are the same. Science and mysticism are the same, like physics and metaphysics. And mysticism and nature are the same. So as I look at this beautiful dam that's down here, that was built in 1926, I reflect on the idea that in the 1920s, the whole idea of power in Little Cascade, Michigan, took on a whole different idea and air. But they were not strangers to electricity. If you were to Google, I say this a lot because I Google a lot, and almost invariably, it's wrong. If you were to Google, what is the oldest hydroelectric dam or power plant in this country? The first thing that you will find is that it's not in 1893 at the Chicago exhibition. Google will tell you that it was in 1882 in Appleton, Wisconsin. The only problem with that is that in 1880 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the first sawmill was converted into a hydroelectric dam. The very first hydroelectric power plant was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we don't have but pieces of it, but even like within my memory, the electrical runs from that were still existent. If you were in Monroe and were able to go to Prusser's Jewelry, they still had the bare wires in the ceiling. And if you remember, they had a train that brought the jewelry back to the shop and stuff. All of that was electric, and it was run by the very first hydroelectric dam. Now, if you imagine what kind of a miracle that was in 1880. The idea in 1880 of why they needed to do that was driven by a whole bunch of things. One of the things is that the people who lived across the river were Catholic, and they did not want the Catholics to cross the river and work in town. So there was this division in the river between the west side and the east side. That doesn't exist anymore, does it? What does that have to do with here? So after Rix Robinson moved here, the two largest landowners were these brothers that came from Ireland. And they came here, and between the both of them, they bought the maximum amount of acreage, 80 acres, and they continued to buy acreage. They bought it from the natives because Rix Robinson, when he made his treaty with the natives here, he bought them thousands of acres to make sure that they would always have land by the river here. The land that we're on is part of that. And so the brothers bought land here, and they moved here from Ireland, and they went down to buy acreage, and you had to go down to Ionia and register your land deed and buy the land from the government, because the government made a treaty with the natives and the French just a few years before, and you could buy up to 80 acres. They bought 80 acres. Why did they buy acreage in Cascade and Ada? Because they were Irish. And because they were Irish, they were Catholic. And because they were Catholic, they were not welcome in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So fast forward to the 1920s, and they're building a dam here. Why are they doing that? In 1925, on July 4th, 15,000 Klansmen marched in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they marched through the west side, through the Catholic neighborhood, against the Polish and the Lithuanian people. And then they turned their sights on the Irish people. And then they marched across the river where the American Methodist Episcopalian Church was, and they marched around the black churches. The people who lived out here, the Catholics on the other side of the river, the west side, and the Catholics that lived outside of Eastern. You know where Eastern is? Well, Eastern is the eastern border of Grand Rapids at the time. That's why there's Pulaski Day. That's why Pulaski Square is on Eastern. That's why all the halls are on Eastern and on the other side of the river. And so the Catholics lived west of Eastern and east of west side, Western. And they realized that at some point they may be cut off from all of the services of the city. Because when 15,000 Klansmen, 3,000 in full regalia, are marching down Bridge Street, you realize that being a Catholic might not be the greatest thing to be in the 1920s in Kent County, Michigan. What does that mean to us here? All of the things that we have emanate from the pain of our own life, from the misfortunes of others, from the history that we have created, and the karma that results from those things. When we talk about being grateful for the life that we have, that gratitude is about the sacrifice of others. It is about what other people withstood in order to bring you what you have here. This building that you are in right now was an Episcopal church. It was I believe, a fundamentalist church. It was an evangelical church. And the land that it sits on held many, we'll call them denominations, of beliefs of the Catholic people before. There were half a dozen Catholic churches just in Cascade alone. Before that, the Mide people and the Anishinaabe people brought their mystical religions that believed in their nature and their science. So all of these things that I'm talking about could be really esoteric and hard to understand unless you know the history, unless you know what happened, unless, you could get to the point where you just become overwhelmed with guilt because of what you are and what you have. But what you are and what you have and who you are and who you have is a result of just that thing that we call life. Surely horrible things have happened in our past, and surely, the same way, beautiful things have happened. When Ray is singing about rolling on the river, if you listen to the words, the first verse are the words of a black maid who lived in the Treme, in the poorest section where black people were allowed to live in New Orleans. And in the second verse are the words of a dishwasher and the words of working class people who never saw the good side of the city, even though they lived on the river. There is two rivers. Inside of us, there are two rivers. And in the same way that we try to become part of the river that emanates from Brahman, from God, from the throne of God, we also try to emanate our own Brahman, our own who we are as a part of God. And that means in the same way that you are provided for from whatever your vision is of source, you also, if you are to follow that metaphor, have a duty to provide. have a duty to share, have a duty to have your source go out, whether it is in the form of just who you are, a smile, your sympathy, your empathy, your compassion. Those are the energies of life that emanate from you. You are the throne of God. And so when we gather with the saints at the river, we're not talking about Catholic saints or Episcopalian saints or euphemistic saints. You gather with the saints because you are the sainted ones. When Fillmore entered into the 1900s, into the 1920s, he realized what was going on throughout this country. And he realized that the Klan had risen again and that his idea of unity, of one God, of one church, that the country was headed in a totally different direction. And instead of separating himself from what was going on, he did all he could to make sure that he understood as much as he could of the Jewish faith, as much as he could of the Hindu faith, as much as he could of the Native American faith of where he was in Missouri. But also as much as he possibly could about science and about nature. I could ask you to close your eyes. Ray, could you give us a little Come to Jesus music? I told you I'm Pentecostal. There's this place at the end of every service, and we used to have to go to big tents, and at the end, they would bring these giant Hammond B3 organs with these big Leslie speakers, and it would take 10 guys just to bring these organs out to these tent revivals. Because as Pentecostals, we are pretty much convinced that if there's enough bass and there's enough tremolo, that you can actually feel God. I like to have big speakers at home just for that. More than anything, I want you to close your eyes and meditate on the idea that things are not the way you think they are. They are not necessarily the way you believe they are. That even the words that I say today are the best metaphors that I have to give you in this moment. And tomorrow I will know more, and tomorrow I will know better. And tomorrow you will know more, and tomorrow you will do better. Notice I said do better. Because what you think and what you believe and what you are a part of, nature, science, and mystery, doesn't mean anything unless you do something. And in the same way, in 1880s in Grand Rapids, we were experiencing the Chinese Exclusionary Act. And the first act to exclude people from this country in the history of this country. In the same way that the Klan rose in the 1920s and built the dam outside of this church. We find ourselves in a place again where the lessons of the past are not in accordance with the things that are inside of you. are the things that flow you towards the river, towards life, and towards all of those things that we think, that we believe, that we understand to be why we're here. And so while most meditations are about thoughts and feelings, and maybe even emptying your mind of thoughts and feelings, I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do about it? Because the power of the river is in its power to move, is in its power to transform, it's its power to change, its power to feed life, because we are mostly water. And maybe water is not all that special. And maybe being a part of the river is the most special thing you can be, because it's the most special thing that you can do. What are you going to do? I thank you for your attention. Namaste. And enjoy the day, please. Thank you.